I will pass to you, Bhante, and thank you so much all for being here.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for zooming in on this really, really cold night. I hope you're all warm, or at least getting warm. So we might make a start on our topic tonight, starting over. I just thought this might be a good thing to talk about and for us to turn over in our own hearts and minds. So I'll just start with our little refuge. If you'd like to join in, feel free. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Anatipata veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. So, where to begin? Well, let's begin in the middle of the mess. Because if you're on the path of practice, then for sure you will know all about the mess. You'll know all about the darkness that you often find yourself in. You'll know all about feeling like, oh, is it worth continuing? You know, I've done so much work, but I don't seem to get anywhere. I'm a bit over all of this. Or why am I doing this? They're all good questions. But they're actually universal questions, except I think that for Buddhists, they have a particular kind of meaning. So I'd like to start by putting in front of you that wonderful passage in Dante's Divine Comedy, which goes like this. In the middle of the journey of our life, I came to myself within a dark wood where the straight way was lost. How hard a thing it is to tell what a wild and rough and stubborn wood this was, which in my thoughts renews the fear. Here's this wonderful passage describing what it's like, as he says, in the middle journey of our life. Notice he uses our, not my life, because he wants to suggest that this is a path that all of us find ourselves on and then find ourselves in the dark wood. And the dark wood, he says, is a wild, rough and stubborn place. And even thinking about it renews the fear within me. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, this idea of the forest is very important. I'm not talking about the romantic notion of going off into the forest to meditate. I'm talking about the realistic idea or experience of the forest, for example, at the time of the Buddha. And then the metaphorical forest, which is used in teaching, the forest of the heart and the mind. Because that's where we come into the really dark place. I've told some of you before, my lovely teacher used to say, as he poked me in the chest with his little bony finger, he would say, go into the forest of the heart, look for the tree of enlightenment, sit down and don't move. Sit down and don't move. So going into your own heart, into your own citta, is, if you like, really the beginning of the path, the beginning of wisdom. So we find examples of this image of darkness, of the dark wood, of a wild, rough, stubborn place, which exists within ourselves. It exists in all religious or spiritual traditions. So if you'd like to look some of them up, you can find it in the Hindu tradition. You can find it in the, excuse me, in the Christian tradition, particularly among the Christian mystics. People like Meister Eckhart, people like John of the Cross, and so on, especially in John of the Cross, who talks about the dark night of the soul. So there are examples, and also in, of course, in the Sufi tradition, you find it. So I guess I wanted to begin tonight by raising this question of, of the experience of this kind of darkness, this kind of confusion, this feeling of being lost, and the fear that goes with it. Am I on the right path? Am I, you know, we say colloquially, am I doing the right thing? When we listen to a Dhamma talk, I think very often, and I know I've talked about this before, very often we don't listen to it in a skillful or beneficial way. I was about to say a good way, but that's really not appropriate. A really skillful or beneficial way, a way that produces the real fruit of the Dhamma. Many years ago, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh gave a very beautiful teaching in which he talked about to his students why he teaches Dhamma and how they should listen to it. And it was a wonderful, really wonderful talk. And he said to them, you are not to be taking notes. You know, this was in the context of a retreat. You are not to be taking notes, you know, because a Dhamma talk is not about ideas that you can collect. And I remember having exactly the same experience giving a retreat in Melbourne, I've forgotten the name of the town now, up in the mountains outside Melbourne, many years ago. And the people who organised the retreat spent all the time making notes. Everyone else sat and listened and did their practice, and the two organisers were scribbling. They were like reporters, scribbling all through it. And when finally one day I said to them, you're to stop that, they said, oh no, but we need to, because we need to keep a record of it. Thich Nhat Hanh said to his students, the Dhamma, when you hear a Dhamma talk, is like rain. Another classic image from the Buddhist tradition. Especially if you're familiar with the Lotus Sutra, you'll know it talks about the rain of the Dhamma falling on all beings equally. And so Thich Nhat Hanh said, you are not to take notes, and this is the way that you should listen to the talk. You're not listening to the talk in order to collect ideas about the Dhamma. He said, and this is such a beautiful image, he said, you yourself are the soil. You contain the seeds of the Dhamma. You have to let the Dhamma, as it's spoken or as it's offered to you, you have to let that fall like rain into your own heart and mind and moisten the soil and allow the seeds of Dhamma to grow, to sprout, to grow bigger and bigger and to flower and produce fruit. And I thought, what a wonderful image, what a wonderful way to think about approaching listening to the Dhamma. Of course, you know, he was, Thich Nhat Hanh was a really an extraordinary teacher, an extraordinary human being. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that listening to me is going to be like having the rain of the Dhamma fall into your hearts and cause the seeds of Dhamma to sprout. But maybe calling to mind his teaching might help a little bit and help you to have that kind of experience. He also pointed out that by not interfering, that is, by simply allowing your heart and mind to be open and be receptive to the teaching, this allows the Dhamma to penetrate deeply into the heart and the mind. That is, you're not putting it through the sieve or the filter of conceptual thinking. You're just receiving it, and you, so to speak, you let it gestate within yourself. And this means that you're not also then paying attention to distractions that normally form part of what goes on in the mind. You know, I'm distracted by this, I'm distracted by that. But rather you have a quality of openness. So I think that's that's a good place to, or a good thing to remind ourselves when we think about getting on the path again. Because the reality is that all of us fall off the path, sometimes with monotonous regularity, but at some point or points, you're going to fall off the path, so to speak, or you'll be on the wrong path. And by the wrong path, I don't mean that you'll be doing bad things. I mean that you'll be walking a path which does not lead to Cetavimmuti. It's not ekayano, not the path that only goes in one direction that the Buddha taught. It'll be a different path. It'll be a path that you've devised. And there's some beautiful examples of this happening in the life of the Buddha himself. There's one famous one where the Buddha is traveling between two towns and he has a monk accompanying him. I can't remember the name of the monk now. And they came to a fork in the road. And the Buddha says, we'll go this way. And the monk says, no, we should go this way. And the Buddha says, well, no, this is the way we should go to such and such a town. And the monk says, no, we should be going this way. And the Buddha says, well, okay, you go the way you want to. And the Buddha continues on the road that he's chosen, and the monk goes off by himself. And some hours later, the Buddha hears thump, 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 running up the road behind him, and it's the monk. And his robes are in tatters, and he's bleeding, and he says, oh, on that road I was caught by bandits and beaten. He said, yeah, you were right, I should have stayed on this road. Right? Now, of course, that's presented as some sort of historical story, but of course, it's a great metaphor for what can happen if we get off, so to speak, the right path. And I think it's just part of the lived experience of all of us that from time to time, we do find ourselves either off the path or going on, so to speak, the wrong path, or just sitting on the side of the path, watching other people go past and thinking, oh, at some point, maybe I'll start again. So it's very important to recognize where you are at present. You know, are you on the path? Do you think that you're going in a good direction, in so to speak, the right direction, the direction that, excuse me, is in accordance with the teaching of the Buddha? Or when you look carefully, when you reflect, when you acknowledge the truth of where you are, how you are, and dare I say, who you are, that you might have to make some changes in order to reestablish the path, in order to get back on, so to speak, the path. We look at the little symptoms, if you like, or the signs that things are not going well. So things like the present suffering that we're experiencing. You know, very, very often we can experience a lot of suffering over Dhamma practice. Oh, you know, this, I'm not good at it, or this is not good, that's not good, or this particular aspect of it drives me crazy, or this, I don't like this teacher, you know, I wish I had this other teacher, and so on. The dissatisfactions that arise within the heart and the mind. Yeah, these also, excuse me, these also cause us suffering. The strong sense of things in our life being unsatisfactory. It's another thing that, you know, is a kind of indicator that, you know, maybe we're not actually on the path or we're wobbling on the path. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that that everything on the path should be smooth sailing and perfect, but I think you understand what I mean. that when things start to go wrong, when you spend a lot of time in your meditation practice and you feel like you're going absolutely nowhere, then, maybe we have a saying, don't we, smell the roses? Well, in the Buddhist tradition, we should say, smell the dukkha. There's something's rotten in the state of Denmark. And that rottenness, that dissatisfaction and suffering, if we look really carefully, we find or we discover that it's not actually with the world. The world has heaps and heaps of problems. My goodness, we're living in a time that who would ever have thought we'd be living in such a time at the moment, with a war going on in Europe, with disease all over the world. Now we've discovered foot and mouth disease in Indonesia and Bali. We've got terrible things happening in various places around the world. We've got dictators, seizing control and doing terrible, terrible things. The world, in a way, the world has ever been thus. Even in the time of the Buddha, you had really, really dreadful, some of them, really, really terrible kings practicing fratricide and so on. So it's not the world as such that's the problem, but it's this world, the world of this body, this heart, this mind. And the Buddha makes this clear on numerous occasions in the suttas, that the problem that we need to deal with is not the external world, but this world, this body, this heart, this mind. Now, that's not to say that we don't make every effort we possibly can to alleviate suffering in, if you like, to think of it as the external world. Because we can't, crawl off into a cave and close the door. That's a kind of foolish self-indulgence. But there's no point in being disgusted by the world. You remember, some of you anyway will remember the wonderful sutta, the Maharahula Ovada Sutta, in which the Buddha talks about the way to approach one's practice. And he runs through the elements. And he says, let your practice be like the earth, using the earth element as an example. So, because no matter what happens to the earth is not disgusted. The earth does not react to it. And then he gives really gross examples. He says, if someone urinates on the earth, if they spit on the earth, if they defecate on the earth, if they throw things onto the earth does not react to it. So the Buddha says that's that's how your practice should be. So the focus is on, without ignoring the world, the external world, the focus is on this world, this body, this heart, this mind. When we forget that, then we start constructing Dhamma. We start building a Dhamma which is outside ourselves. Oh, the Dhamma is like this and I'm going to get it. So the Dhamma becomes a kind of, a kind of spiritual commodity. And that's really, really dangerous and really poisonous. So the Buddha says, keep the goal always before you. But he doesn't say, cling to the goal. He doesn't say, I turn the goal into an idol of some sort, but just keep it in front of you. Keep it there in front of you, knowing, what you're moving towards. But don't turn it into something that it's not. So often in the suttas, the Buddha's giving this kind of advice, to be realistic about things and realistic about yourself, and to remember. But not to cling to the past, not to cling to the present, and don't cling to the future. This is a very difficult teaching. And this teaching sits at the very heart of practice. Not clinging. Don't cling to the past, because many of us, we live out of the past. In a way, we can't help it, because in a way, we think of ourselves as the product of our past. We experience great suffering when we cling to the present, because in very simple terms, we like what's nice and enjoyable and pleasurable, and we don't like what's not enjoyable, what's not pleasurable, what's painful. So if there's something good going on, we try and cling to it. And we can develop all sorts of unhealthy and unskillful and unwholesome habits arising out of that. We can also cling to the future. Again, projecting, I'm working towards becoming enlightened. I'm going to be like the Buddha. Or sometime in the future, things will get better in my Dhamma practice. So I just keep, hoping that that'll happen. Or I spend a lot of time fantasizing about the future. I had a student once, I remember many years ago, who used to come to discuss their meditation practice. And I would ask them to describe for me what was happening in their practice, and they would tell me. And when finally I said to them, look, I really think that you need to go back to the beginning and, so to speak, rejig your practice again. This person said, oh, but Bhante, why should I do that? I'm only this far away from enlightenment. I said, well, you're very lucky if that's so. I think all of us need to, from time to time, rejig or reset our practice, and to check regularly, not in an obsessive way, but to recheck regularly, what path am I actually on? And to check that we are making an effort or trying to not cling to things. In the Buddhist tradition, there's this word nekama, nekama, and it's translated most of the time as renunciation, as like pushing away. I don't want this, I don't want that. But really, the best way to look at it is, I just don't pick up things. It's not that I'm sort of disparaging the thing. I'm just saying, well, no, I'm not interested. I won't be picking that up. The Buddha put it this way, I am not these are not mine. These do not belong to me. When talking about self, of course, but still it applies to that. So the ground of our practice is practice itself. It's not something outside which I can apply, which I can, so to speak, get like it's almost like the idea that you go to some sort of spiritual IKEA and you buy the flat pack for enlightenment, and you construct it. And then you call your friends over and say, oh, look at me, I'm enlightened. No, the ground of practice, the Dhamma, in the original meaning of that word, of course, is ground. And I'm sure Thich Nhat Hanh was meaning that as well, the idea that you yourself are the ground, you yourself are the Dhamma, and within that ground there are the seeds of the Dhamma to further grow and flourish and develop and be of benefit and use to others. To produce fruit. I'm sure that's part of the reason why the Buddha chose the word bhavana, to cultivate. It's another word for our practice, to cultivate, to grow things in, in the soil. So this not clinging to things it's very important, but we must make sure that we don't turn it into some kind of negative darkness that hangs over our practice. It should rather be a kind of liberating factor in our practice. So the Buddha in the Dhammapada, the Buddha puts it in these terms. He says, if by giving up a limited ease, that is some small thing which is very enjoyable, very pleasurable and so on, you could see an abundance of ease, then surely the wise man would forsake the limited for the sake of the abundance. So in other words, having a bigger view, seeing more. Remember in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha talks about seeing what had not been seen before. So when we are embarking on the path of practice, and when we're trying to reset that path, we need to really open our eyes and have a spiritual eyes, of course, and have a bigger view, a bigger vision. And this is part of course, samaditi, whole view, complete view. It's whole and complete before it's right. Unfortunately, in English, people always write down right view, right view. And in English, right is often the polar opposite of wrong. But samaditi is actually whole or complete or full. And then yes, then it's right. So, I hope you're letting some of this rain in through the roof. Oh dear. So, this is the ground of practice then. Each one of us is the ground of practice. Each one of us is the Dhamma. Each one of us is the soil of the Dhamma. Each one of us contains the seeds of the Dhamma. And we need to recognize that. And we need, in order to reset, to get back onto the path, we need to acknowledge the mess that we have created or that we find ourselves in from time to time. But again, we need to do that without harsh judgment. We need to do it with great patience, with great khanti, and with great compassion. And we need to start that with ourselves, to be patient with ourselves, and not to constantly be sort of looking, maybe in a week's time I can move on to this in my practice. But rather just be patient. Just sit and, so to speak, allow the Dhamma to develop and to reveal itself within our own bodies, hearts, and minds. And to remind ourselves when we feel, maybe, we feel depressed or disappointed or disillusioned, that, there's no light without darkness. Remember, in the suttas, there's a wonderful story of the Buddha's enlightenment, where the first thing in the early hours of the dawn, before the dawn has actually happened, the Buddha looks up and he sees the morning star. And he looks at it and he says, I have finally attained enlightenment. I've finally touched enlightenment. So somehow that tiny speck of light in the night sky, as the night begins to turn, into dawn, into day, the Buddha announces his enlightenment. So we need to also develop the confidence that we can do the same thing. Instead of just sitting in the dark and feeling miserable or feeling lost and disillusioned and so on, which is very easy to do, but it's a death trap. Now, in order to do it, we have to decide if we feel we've drifted off the path or we've gone sideways or we're not quite sure where we are, then what we need is a new way of approaching things. Now, in the Greek tradition, there is a wonderful word, metanoia, metanoia, and it means a complete change of heart or a redirecting of the heart away from what it was going towards something else, which is much more wholesome, skillful, and beneficial, much more life-giving. It's a great word, metanoia. So that's what we need. We need to acknowledge where we are, acknowledge if you like, the bit of a mess or the disappointments with ourselves, with our practice. Often I know often when I've been teaching, I'll be finished and I'll think, that was a hopeless teaching. That was, and then I have to remind myself, don't be an idiot. It's you who are hopeless, not the teaching. The teaching itself is fine. It's you you're talking about. So if we have metanoia and we couple it with compassion, and patience, then we've got some hope of moving forward. And remember also that during the period when the Buddha became enlightened, and Mara challenged him, Mara, the bringer of death, the truly destabilizing, disorganized one. Mara said to him, you might be enlightened, but you've got no witnesses. And the Buddha used what's became known as the Bhumispara mudra. He reached down over his knee, and with his fingertips, he touched the earth. He touched the ground that he was sitting on. Of course, this is touching the Dhamma as well. And he said to Mara, the earth is my witness. And the earth trembled and Mara ran off. Again, another great image of the grounding quality of the Dhamma, of the practice. So it's good to remember that practicing is not about taking flight. When I lived in Thailand, there were endless stories. People would tell me they'd come to the monastery and they'd say, oh, did I know such and such, this particular monk? And I'd say, oh, I've heard of him. Yes, well, do you know he can fly? And I'd say, really? And they'd say, oh, yes, he's often seen flying around Chiang Mai, as though the air traffic control in Chiang Mai should be looking out and giving him a space to land, Whenever you try to track down these people, you never found anybody who'd actually seen him fly. So the stories were fabulous. The Buddha doesn't talk about flying. The Buddha talks about being grounded, being earthed. Not being depressed, but being earthed. And it's so important. And by being earthed, then we break out of the darkness of these other things, of disillusion, of suffering. Some of you will remember, I'm sure, that the wonderful song of Patachara, one of the first of the women who were disciples of the Buddha, a wonderful, wonderful person. And in her song, she talks about how, she says, of course, I can't remember it off by heart, but she says something like, when young men till the soil and they plant their grain and so on, they find riches. In other words, they do all these ordinary, normal things. They've got a family and they do really well and so on. And then she says, but, I've followed the advice of my teacher. I've done everything right. Oh, that's the wrong word to use, right? I've done everything right. And she says, but look at me, I've got nowhere. So there's a kind of struggle within herself. Now, in this little song, she is genuinely that far away from Nibbana, but she doesn't know it yet. And then she says, so I went and I washed my feet and I watched the water running down the slope. I went into my hut, my kuti. I extinguished the light, stretched out my feet. And beautifully, she says, and the great dark was torn apart. So she touches impermanence, watching the water run down the slope. She's had the experience of being so dissatisfied. I've done all these things. I've been a good person. The Buddha loves hearing that because he loves kind of pricking that balloon of, I'm a good person. You might remember the Buddha's disciple Meghiya, who when he was confronted with his hopelessness at meditation practice, which was based on a false image of himself, he goes to the Buddha and he says, but I'm a good person, I'm the son of good people. Of course, the Buddha also challenges us by saying, stop thinking about being good, bad, or indifferent. Stop thinking about being equal to others, less than others, or greater than others. So Patachara has the experience of enlightenment, and it follows immediately after she's had this distressing experience, but then she watches, she tunes in to impermanence. It's a very, very beautiful song of enlightenment, honestly. It's just very, very beautiful. And there's so much in it for us, so much encouragement in it for us. Now, of course, it's no good just going out in the backyard tonight and pouring some water and watching it run down the drain and then going and sitting down to do your practice and thinking, right, okay, it's going to happen any moment. No, because, obviously she'd been on and off the path for a long time. So maybe, if we remember that what we need is to develop this spacious kind of approach to practice, then we can get back onto the good path, the wholesome, the skillful, the beneficial path. Some of you I know have heard of before because I've talked about him. Ajahn Bunyarith he used to be in Adelaide, and he passed away a few years ago in Thailand, and I think he was about 104 when he died. A most extraordinary teacher, but incredibly casual. So much so that the other Thai monks used to get very annoyed with him. He had a wonderful sense of humor. And at the same time, he was a marvelous meditation teacher and practitioner. And when people would ask him, Bhante, when's the right time to practice? He would immediately say, when the thought of practice arises in the mind. That's the right time. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, when the thought of practice arises in them, because that's the opportunity for metanoia. That's the opportunity to have a change of direction. That's the opportunity, if you like, to put your hands on the steering wheel again, instead of having the car going all over the road. Again, a wonderful, wonderful teacher who's gone, like Thich Nhat Hanh. And you wonder sometimes, will we ever see them again? So it's a question of letting go, of acknowledging, where I am, and of giving up the idea that I can move forward by accumulating things. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, it's not about accumulating or collecting or gathering ideas about Dhamma. Ideas about Dhamma are just that. They're ideas about Dhamma. That can be seen sometimes in the Buddhist tradition as a kind of idolatry. If you have a look at the way that Buddhist texts are sometimes treated, they're treated almost like relics are treated in the Western tradition. They're wrapped in special cloths and they're put up on altars and all sorts of things. And quite frankly, I understand why we should treat those things with reverence and respect, but I doubt very much that the Buddha himself would be all that pleased with that kind of behavior. I think he would recognize the kind of idolatrous tendency and the tendency to move out of one's own heart and mind and to objectify something. Once we've done that, then we've fallen off the path again. So it's tricky, and we have to find a way to protect this fragile self by letting go. I think it's good to remember, there's that wonderful passage, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, from Shantideva, which appeared in that wonderful film, The Cup, which came out many years ago now, about the young monks wanting to watch the World Cup soccer, and the novice master who was very annoyed with them for crowding into a room watching it on TV. And at the end of that film, the filmmaker, I've forgotten the name of him, is it Ponlop Rinpoche? I forget now anyway. They put up a little passage from Shantideva on the screen. Yeah? If there is a problem and there is a solution, why worry? If there's a problem and there's no solution, why worry? Yeah? So you get the sense, you get the feel, you get the tone of what Shantideva was saying. If we start to wrestle too much with something, we turn it into something really, really solid, and it becomes a burden. So worrying in that way, am I this, am I that, am I something else, is really to sort of spin a web around oneself. Once we see that, I think we can start to change it. So we can actually begin to reorient ourselves, our approach to practice. Because there's only one place where practice can happen, and that's right here in this body, heart, and mind. This business of, it has to be in the perfect spot. And so, yes, it's great to have perfect spots. Like we've got Vajrasala now, which is so beautiful and so accommodating, and it's in a lovely setting and so on. It's wonderful to have places like that, and we really need places like that. But in the end, it comes down to what you're doing here within your own heart and mind. Again, some of you probably thinking, oh, not another one of these stories. But, Ajahn Bunyarith, when I was staying with him in Adelaide many years ago, and a young girls' school came, and they came with a Catholic nun, and Bunyarith lived in what was really a bit like Sangha Lodge. It was really just an old sort of rundown house, and the Thai community had set it up as a sort of little sort of monastic dwelling. But of course, because they'd set it up, they had the most enormous shrine in this place. The shrine occupied a huge amount of the room where meditation took place, with a gigantic golden Buddha image on it. And so Bunyarith, when the girls arrived, I said to Ajahn Bunyarith, oh, I'll go now, Tun, if you'll excuse me. And he turned to me, he said, you're not going anywhere, sit down. And so I had to sit with him while the girls came in with the good sister. And he gave a lovely Dhamma talk to the girls. And then he said, any questions? And of course, the girls, they just sort of sat there staring. I suppose it was all so different and so foreign to them. And then the Catholic sister, she said, Tun, would you explain the shrine to the girls? That's a fair enough question too. But Bunyarith, she didn't realise how naughty he could be. So he leant a little bit towards the shrine, which was on his right, and he put his arm up, pointing right up to the top where the top of the Buddha's head was, and he drew it down slowly, and he said, oh, girls, so beautiful and completely useless. The sister was horrified. The girls began to smile and giggle a bit. And then he explained what he meant, that the practice takes place here, that thing is not the Buddha. It's simply a reminder. It's simply, oh, yeah, okay, that thing somehow embodies a little bit of the qualities of the Buddha. But really, the real embodiment of the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha is here, in this body, this heart, this mind. That was the style of his teaching always. He was really quite remarkable. So we need to find for ourselves the balancing point between self and suffering, and to recognize that meditation practice, or bhavana, you could say, is the way back to this balancing point between self and suffering, between self and dukkha. And how are we going to to do this? Well, we have to try to, if you like, stir up or raise up our awareness so that we see that each moment is a new beginning. Some of you will remember, pardon me, that wonderful book which came out many, many years ago by Suzuki Roshi called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Yeah. It's just a little book like this, but it contains the most wonderful wisdom and most wonderful, helpful instruction for practice, for walking the path of the Dhamma. Zen mind, beginner's mind. Yeah. Not clever mind, not academic's mind, not, if you'll pardon me, smart-ass mind, but beginner's mind. Like, if you like, baby mind, which is open to everything, which has that quality of awe about it. Meister Eckhart, another favourite of mine, a medieval or late medieval, really a sort of theologian, philosopher, mystic, he has a wonderful saying. He says, the thing that we need is to be willing to begin every morning as though it's a new beginning. Yeah, begin every morning as though it's a new beginning. So it starts in the morning, and I think that's a really interesting idea, that we start, if you like, we start when we're in bed. You know, okay, open my eyes, it's a new day. And whatever happened yesterday, I had a great mate when I was at uni who was a Maori. He was the funniest fella you'd ever meet. His name was Jack Smith. That was his English name. His Maori name was Wiramutakuti. And he was naughty. He was really naughty. And he was always getting into trouble. And I said to him one day, Jack, how can you stand, getting into trouble the way that you do? And he laughed. He put his finger up to his lips and he said, that was yesterday. That was yesterday. So today's a whole new day, Today's trouble, that'll be today's trouble, but then it'll be yesterday's trouble. And that was the way that he approached things. And he truly had a most wonderful life. I remember he took myself and a couple of other fellas to the Opera House one night to listen to Kiri Te Kanawa. And Jack was very, very Maori, very dark, and had that very Maori face. And as we got closer to the Opera House, he said, hey, would you like to meet Kiri? And of course we said, but just being very young, oh yeah, that'd be really good, Jack. Yeah, she's my cousin, he said. So we went to the green room door and we rang the bell on the door, and the man came out who was like the security person, and Jack, who looked like he'd just come from New Zealand, said, is Kiri in? And this man looked at him and said, I beg your pardon? He said, Kiri, is Kiri in? Kiri's my cousin. Just tell her that Wiramu's here. So the man went away and Kiri Te Kanawa came back. And we went in and sat down in a kind of lounge area, and it became clear almost immediately that Kiri was well aware that he was not related to her, but she thought it was hilarious. So they chatted away, and she was so lovely to all of us, and then we left. And when we came outside, one of the fellows said, Jack, she's not your cousin. Yeah, but she could be, he said. So, that's approaching every day as a kind of a new day, and I think that's a really good thing to do. So each day and each moment within the day is another starting over. And in a funny way, the refusal to do it is a kind of hanging on, is a clinging to the idea that there's something permanent about this experience. Yeah, or just, hang on to this and that'll be it. But usually when we're not approaching the idea that, every day is a new day, every moment is a new and different moment, we're being swept along, as it were, like we just had those dreadful, dreadful floods. And it's like we're being swept away in the flood of these things. Whereas it's interesting, the Buddha says that his Dhamma goes against the current, goes against the stream. In the Lotus Sutra, there's a beautiful passage. It says, the scent of the Dhamma goes against the wind. So the wind goes in one direction, but the fragrance of the Dhamma goes in the opposite direction. It's not pushed along by all those things, just as the Buddha's teaching is not pushed down in the stream of becoming, but actually is able to bounce along, so to speak, and go backward. My goodness. So there's so much in the teaching, and so much that we can tap into and touch into and make part of our own living experience if we're willing to just make that little change. But unfortunately, I said to you, wake up and smell the dukkha. Well, unfortunately, the smell of the past often blows into our present and colours it and discolours it and helps us to become trapped in darkness. So we have to be on the lookout for that all the time and try to look at, okay, what am I doing in this moment and this moment and this moment, but not in an obsessive way. Otherwise, you'll go mad. You'll be completely bonkers. Yeah. And don't worry, there are plenty of meditators who've gone mad. Yeah. I told you about the American monk that I stayed with in Thailand for a while. And when I first met him, all the villagers said, "Oh, Penpa Arahant, he's an Arahant." So, oh, wow, okay. Yeah. When I met him, I said to him, "So what do you do?" He was living in an old abandoned monastery with a young Thai novice who did all the work because he was a meditator. That is the American monk. And he said, "I meditate." He said it with real, almost a ferocity. And I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Yes, I just sit, I sit and I sit and I sit and I sit." And then he said, "Look, I'll show you." And he lifted the back of his sabong up and showed me his bare backside, which had these massive pressure sores on them, on each cheek. And I thought, you poor fool. If you think this is what practice is about, And I said, "So what do you intend to do?" He said, "Once I'm finished here, I'm going back to the United States and I'm going to get a motorbike and I'm going to go around and teach Dhamma." And I thought, oh my goodness, this is someone who thinks they're on the path and who are clearly not on the path at all. I'd say some kind of madness going on there. So if we try just to keep a little check on, okay, am I lost at the moment? Okay, how long am I lost for? In my meditation practice, this is much easier, because we consciously and deliberately let go of everything else so that we can just sit and be with whatever's arising. And so by developing our awareness, we can see, oh, okay, yeah, I got lost there. Oh, lost again. Now come back to the center, lost a little bit more there, back to the center. So, I don't know, when I was thinking about this topic, I then started to think maybe the whole idea of starting over is actually a wrong one. Because if we really think about it and if we really experience it and practicing it, we can't stop starting over. It's a question of starting over, though, in a good direction, in a wholesome, skillful and beneficial direction, rather than just being dragged along and developing more and more misunderstanding, more ignorance, more greed, hatred, and delusion. Because after all, I'm here already, and if I'm not here, then I'm nowhere. So I've got to start from where I am, start from where I am right now. So we start by, again, returning to the experience of letting go. Practicing letting go in little ways, little bit by little bit by little bit, and until we can finally become or know that we are free. We can ask ourselves, am I following the Dhamma according to why the Buddha taught the Dhamma? Yeah. As I said to you earlier, the Buddha didn't teach the Dhamma so we could become scholars or clever or famous or, be able to run around teaching other people. He taught the Dhamma so that we could imbibe the Dhamma, bring the Dhamma into ourselves, discover the Dhamma in ourselves, and manifest the Dhamma in our lives for our own well-being and happiness and the well-being and happiness of others. My lovely teacher, he used to say to me all the time, again, poking with that bony finger into my chest, he'd say to me, you cannot teach people what you know, referring to the Dhamma. You might be terribly clever, but you can't really teach them. To be a benefit, you can only show them what you are knowing. That use of the continued tense. So it's not collecting a whole lot of facts and then handing them out like visiting cards, but showing people through who you are, the quality of the person that you are becoming. Not the person you have this image of, but the person that you are becoming, the person who is, so to speak, in progress, who's growing. And the thing that really helps us with this, and I come back to this over and over and over, is to have real faith or trust in the Buddha which really means confidence in the teaching of the Buddha. And we can only get that by, first of all, by tasting it for ourselves, even just a little tiny bit in our own experience, and also by being shown it. Yeah, not by being taught it. I mean, being taught it, yes, that's important, but being shown it in the life of another. You know, and you can, the person who's showing it to you is not a card-carrying Buddhist necessarily. You know, the person showing it to you could be the person next door, the person who lives above or below you, you know, someone that you know, someone you don't know, who demonstrates what Dhamma is. You know? It's so important. You know, there's in the Buddhist tradition, there is no room for sectarianism, despite the fact that there is plenty of sectarianism. In the teaching of the Buddha, there ought not to be. The Buddha, in fact, forbids monks and nuns to engage in argument with followers of other religious traditions. He doesn't just say, oh, it's probably not a good idea, fellas. No, he says you are not to do this. Yeah. It's unwholesome, it's unhelpful, it's unskillful. And of course, what does it do? It just inflates the self. You know, oh, I'm, you know, we're better than you are, I'm cleverer than you are, and so on. So we better start to wind this up, I think. So it's a good idea. In the monastic tradition, we have a little tradition of twice a month going to Patimokkha, reciting the monastic rule. It's highly ritualized. All the monks have to get inside the ubosot, inside the ordination chapel. One monk is posted at the door to stop anyone else coming in once the thing begins. Any monk who arrives late is driven away. And then when the monk who's reciting, and everyone has to sit so that they're within elbow length of each other. So in the middle of the hot season, when everyone's packed in there, it's not very comfortable, and it goes for a very long time. You have two older monks who are the auditors, who are the listeners, and they're listening for any mistake in the recitation made by the reciter monk. And the other monks are sitting there thinking, oh, please, let him not make a mistake. Because if he makes a mistake, they interrupt and they make him go back to the beginning. So it could be a very long session. In my monastery, our favorite monk for reciting the Patimokkha was not a resident at our place. He used to come from another temple up the road, and they had two monks who could recite it. It takes quite a lot. It has to be recited by heart, and it's very long. This monk had been a Thai boxer, and he was built like a Thai boxer. He was little, sort of fierce looking, but a great sense of humor, and was very kind. But we all loved him reciting the Patimokkha because he was so fast. He was so fast that the auditors could never detect a mistake. It was like playing a tape on, 2 or 3 times the speed it should be played at. So this idea of confessing, and in that ritual, there is a question, is everyone clean and clear in this? And if you're not, you have to say so. And of course, then he moves on to the next section and so on. But before that, each monk is required to go to confession to another monk. And it's very interesting because in reciting the confessional ritual, the monk who's confessing, and this is done, by the way, between oneself as, say, a junior monk, as I was in those days, and my teacher was a very, very senior monk, and then he would confess to me, which was extraordinary. So it's not a one-way thing. So you would say in English, it would be done in Pali, of course, but in English you'd say something like, look, Venerable Sir or Venerable Tun, I put before you that I've created all sorts of unskillful offences and so on in many ways and at many different times, that I put these in front of you now. And you could then say, if you wanted to, you could say some things in particular that you were aware of. And And then the person listening to the confession says, do you see, my friend? Do you see, my friend? It's very interesting, just the wording, yeah? Pasasi awuso, do you see, my friend? And the confessing monk or nun says, yeah, I do see. Yeah, I do see. I do see what I'm saying to you, and I do see what I've done. And then the response is from the person listening, from the auditor, is something like, well, that's wonderful. In future, just make an effort. Yeah, just make an effort. It's not, I'll wake up to yourself, oh, you had this last month and so on. No, it's just, okay, great, make an effort. Yeah. And then the person confessing says, Sadhu Sutu Bhante, Samwari Sami. And he said, and that means in English, sorry, it's good, and so I will try to do that. Yeah. And then the person who heard the confession says, may you also forgive me. Oh. So this is a very gentle but very powerful ritual. So it's very beneficial to acknowledge, okay, this is where I am. This is how I've fallen off the cart, so to speak, the cart of the Dhamma, the old ox cart, as the Buddha described himself, an old ox cart held together by bits of leather. And now I'm getting back on it, and I'm going to make an effort. I can see clearly what I've done, or how I haven't been practicing skillfully or beneficially. So now I make a start again. So I try to encourage you with those words, but I take you right back to the beginning and remind you of Thich Nhat Hanh's approach to the teaching of the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma, and allowing whatever it is in the teaching to drop like rain into your own heart and mind, and to fertilize the seeds of the Dhamma, which are within you right now, as we're here this evening listening. Those seeds are already there. The Buddha, remember, talks about the original nature of the mind is vast and spacious and expansive and luminous. So those seeds, they're already there. We've just got to cultivate them. We've just got to water them. And we water them sometimes by listening to the Dhamma, sometimes by listening to the Dhamma as it's found within our meditation practice, sometimes by listening to the Dhamma as we experience it in the lives of others and in our own life. So I should shut up now, and we should just have a little bit of quiet meditation practice. Oh my goodness. All right, so let's do some practice together. So try to let all those watery words just drain away into the soil of your own heart and mind, and maybe adjust yourself, your posture a little bit if you're uncomfortable, and let yourself rest. Make the decision that regardless of where I find myself right now, I want to make a change of heart and mind. I want to get some of that Greek goodness, that metanoia. I want to reorient my heart and mind again so that I can recognize the Dhamma, so that I can water the seeds of the Dhamma within myself. And as those seeds grow and develop, I can be of great benefit to myself, but of great benefit and blessing to others as well. So I can help others to alleviate their experience of dukkha in its many, many forms. So just very gently let yourself settle. And in the simplest way possible, just let yourself become aware of your own breathing, your own breath. don't worry about concentrating, but rather try to be present. And as the heart and mind wander, then just very gently, oh yeah, I'm wandering again. Okay, come back to that balancing point. The point, so to speak, between self and suffering. Let's see if I can just stay here for a little bit longer. Just entering into the experience of the breath and the body. And allowing some of that spaciousness and vastness and luminous quality of the chitta, the heart and the mind, to manifest itself. And if you're tired, then you're tired. You can be tired and then bounce or spring from the tiredness into a new beginning, a new breath, new experience of the body and the breath. If you're restless, you can have the new beginning of attentiveness out of the restlessness. Let yourself recognize the compassion that's already there within your own body, heart, and mind. The trembling of the heart that takes place in the face of suffering, of dukkha, your own and that of others. A little sign of the presence of Dhamma, the earth of the Dhamma within this body, heart, and mind, the seeds of the Dhamma and the fruit of those seeds in the blossom of compassion. Just let yourself rest gently into your practice. Be aware of gratitude within yourself, arising within the heart and mind, within your practice. Gratitude to yourself for the effort that you've made. All the things you've done to try to cultivate the path of practice. And gratitude to those around you, even though we're on Zoom, those around you at present, practicing with you, but also all those who've helped you in the past in so many, many ways. The teachers that you've had, and just as importantly, the cooks that you've had on retreat. Hanshan and Shite, two scallywags in a Chinese monastery. In the kitchen, that's where they worked. And yet Hanshan was the most enlightened person in the monastery. Wrote glorious poetry about the Dhamma, expressing his experience of the Dhamma. He wasn't the abbot. He wasn't a great teacher. In fact, he fled into the mountains when the emperor sent someone to bring him back to the capital because he was well known. He worked in the kitchen. So when we're resting within the heart and the mind, it's a bit like the kitchen of the heart and the mind. There's all sorts of stuff there. The forest of the heart and the mind. But unlike Dante, entering into the forest of this heart and this mind should not be a cause for giving rise to fear. Sitting within the heart and the mind is the path of practice. And we'll end this evening with a small confessional ritual, which is a personal ritual. I'll do the chanting and then briefly explain. Kainawa wachetasawa buddhiku kamang pakatang mayang buddha patikan tuan chian tang kalantari samwaritung wapude. Kainawa wachetasawa damiku kamang pakatang mayang dam patikan tuan chian tang kalantari samwaritung watame. Kainawa wachetasawa sankiku kamang pakatang mayang sangko patikan tuan chian tang kalantari samwaritung wat sangke. I acknowledge and place before the Buddha all the unskillful and unwholesome and foolish things that I've done. Putting them in front of the Buddha, I acknowledge them, I cast them behind myself, and I make an effort to move forward in my practice. Similarly, I acknowledge before the Dhamma and I acknowledge before the Sangha. So may this evening that we've had a little bit of time together be an opportunity to reorient the heart and the mind. And if you needed to reorient your practice, may it be an opportunity for that to happen. If you are good and strong and steady on the path, then you don't need to do anything except stay on the path. You know, keep going as you're going. So thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Bhante. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
good talk.
Thank you.